Shavua Tov. In the Song of the Sea, we read the pasuk, Amar oyev erdof asig, halek shelal timla emo, nafshi arik harbi torishemo yadi. Which we can translate as, the enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the plunder, my lust shall be satisfied upon them, I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. So in that verse, the narrative voice of the poem imagines the enemy, which is Paro, presumably, chasing after Bnei Israel and saying, we're going to catch up to them. The Egyptians are going to catch up to them and destroy them. And then we're speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the voice of the narrator of the poem, Nashafta beruhacha ki samo yam tzaledu ka'orferet b'mayim adirim. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them, they sank as lead in the mighty waters. So we have the idea that the characteristic of the Mitzrim, of Paro, is that they're saying they're going to catch up with Bnei Israel and they're going to destroy them and divide the plunder. But Hashem responds with his stunning miracle, Kriyat Yam Suf, where the waters come and cover over the Mitzrim and drown them. That moment is obviously one where there are various lines in that whole passage that distill the same idea, where Moshe says to Bnei Israel, you just sit tight and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take care of things, right? Adonai yilahem lachem v'atem tahrishun. God, or the Lord, will make war for you and you all can hold your peace. And that seems to be a kind of a perfect attitude of emunah, of trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Moshe leads the people in. And you might imagine that we always want to emulate that, if possible, right? It seems like the right model. But the phrase that we started with, Amar ha'oyev erdof asig, reminds one of something one reads elsewhere in Tanakh, particularly in the book of Psalms, in Sefer Tehillim, which is King David speaking, David HaMelech. So it's slightly different grammar, but basically the same words, but jumbled together to mean something different. So in Perek Yud Het of Tehillim, so chapter 18 of Psalms, we have the pasuk, Erdof oivai va'asigem, v'lo ashuv al karotham. I pursue my enemies and overtake them and will not turn back till they are consumed. Maybe you could play around with past, future tense there. I will pursue them, I have pursued them, whatever it is. But the point is, it's clearly in dialogue with this other verse that we have in Shirat Hayam, right, which was Amar ha'oyev erdof asig. But here, David HaMelech is saying erdof oivai va'asigem. So the three words are the same, but in one case it's the enemy says, I will chase and catch up with. But here we're saying, David is saying, I will chase the enemy and catch up with them. So in the first instance, the phrase of erdof asig is in the mouth of Paro, or the Mitzrim, the enemy himself. But here David is talking about pursuing his enemy and catching up with him, which puts him a bit in the role of being more like Paro, right? He's the warrior saying, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to catch up with my enemy and finish him off. Unless we think this is a coincidental resemblance, if you go back to the beginning of this Perek in Tehillim, the first pasuk is, Lamanseach la'eved Adonai leDavid, asher diber la'Adonai, et divrei hashira hazot, biyom hitzil Adonai oto, mikaf kol oivav, umiyad Shaul. So to the chief musician of David, the servant of the Lord, who spoke to the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord saved him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Shaul. Now, anyone who's familiar with Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, that Moshe leads the people in after the splitting of the sea, will recognize more than one parallel in this language to the way that we are introduced to the Song of the Sea. The most striking of which is Et Hashira Hazot, right? If we go over to the beginning of Shirat Hayam, it's Az Yashir Moshe u'Bnei Yisrael et Hashira Hazot L'Adonai Vayomeru le'emor Ashira l'Adonai ki ga'o ga'a sus v'rochvo rama bayam. So they sang, Moses and the people of Israel, this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider have been thrown into the sea. And really, if you wanted to, you could multiply parallels between these two passages. There's plenty more. So we're not meant to think this is an accident. We're meant to read the passages alongside each other, but then that just raises the question, why would it be that in the case of Shirat Hayam, Irdof Asig is the phraseology of the enemy himself, right? Paro thinks that he's mighty, that he has horses, that he can catch his enemy, that he can destroy them with his power. And then he's going to find out that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the power and is going to sweep them away, right? But when we go over to David is aping that, seemingly, right? He's talking like he's Paro. And should we be troubled by that? Is that to David's credit, or is it somehow a failing of his? And how are we to understand that, especially since it's not an accident, but it seems like really the text is trying to show us that we should be comparing these and reading them next to each other. So what point is it making that David is deliberately using the language from Shirat Hayam to talk about himself and to say, look at me, I'm like Paro. How could that be a good thing? So I think this ends up being related to a more general question that we might ask, which is, does Moshe Rabbeinu have accomplishments in the same way of other people? And what I mean by that is that we often think of what it means to have an accomplishment is that you have some capability, you have some talent, and you know how it works to do something well, and maybe that's hunting deer, or maybe that's cooking omelets, or maybe that's hang gliding, or whatever it is, but that you could have a skill, you could have a capability, and I could have this one, and you could have that one, and people differ. But if I'm going to have an accomplishment, it's going to be because I'm going to direct my effort at doing something that I know how to do, and I'm going to do it well, and then someone can say, well done, you're accomplished, right? But the issue with Moshe is that the things that Moshe is trying to do are supposed to be impossible, right? Everything he does by some notion of what's natural or what's normal shouldn't be expected to work, right? Going to Paro and speaking the word of Hashem to Paro shouldn't lead to success. It should lead to imprisonment or execution, right? Taking a nation of people into the desert without much food or water should lead to mass starvation or dehydration, but it doesn't. Leading the people with Paro's army chasing behind them to the sea should lead to a massacre, but it doesn't, because Bnei Yisrael are able to walk through the sea because the sea splits. And, you can talk about the Machon as well, the plagues in Egypt. Moshe himself does not have the power to accomplish the things he's trying to accomplish. It all is made up, the difference is made up by Hashem. It's Hashem stepping in and making these nisim. And although from the perspective of an observer, especially one disposed to think in terms of sorcery and idolatry, they'll look at Moshe and say, look, he has this staff and things keep going his way. He must be a wizard who has a wand. But we know theologically, reading the Torah, that that's not what's going on. What's going on is that Moshe has no power to make seas split in general. The sea splits at the moment that he extends his hand when HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands him to, because at that moment, that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to happen, and it's appropriate for that moment. But, the cartoon of Moshe is like, and he can also part the milk in his breakfast cereal if he wants, right? I think that was a Far Side cartoon from many decades ago. But it's exactly the opposite of that. It's that he's not a sorcerer with power to be disposed in whatever way he chooses. He's just someone who speaks the truth that Hashem wants him to speak. And because he's saying it, there are moments where Hashem will step in and give him the backing he needs to be successful, despite the fact that actually Moshe's word, which is Hashem's word, is naturally speaking not supposed to lead to success, right? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu had made the world so that Hashem's word was naturally successful, there would be no grand story of Tanakh. It would all be very easy. Everyone would hear it. They'd say, oh, yep, that makes sense. Now let's just do what Hashem wants forever and always. And that's what would happen, right? But clearly that doesn't happen because of human nature and because so much of how the world seems to work doesn't make it seem like it's a good idea or in your own narrow self-interest to just concern yourself with doing what Hashem wants you to do. And then that becomes the contradiction at the core of the whole drama of Tanakh and the rest of human history, where we're struggling to move in the direction of better recognizing Hashem and better serving Hashem in the face of a world that doesn't seem to be tempting us to do that. It's tempting us to do other things that seem better able to provide us with what we want and all of those things. And so I think that what you need to think of this as in the end is, the point David is making is connected in turn with this idea of the difference between David and Moshe, and that there are different ways of being successful leaders of Bnei Israel, but Moshe represents an extreme that David actually wants to contrast himself with, perhaps in a positive way. So first of all, we can say more directly, the issue with Moshe is that he is the most humble person there ever was. And we learn that directly from the Torah. It says, V'ha'ish Moshe anar me'od mikol ha'adam asher al pnei ha'adama. And Moshe was very humble, more than any other man that was on the face of the earth. This statement about Moshe on its face is a bit puzzling because Moshe at some level seems like you have to be pretty confident to say, I'm speaking for the creator of the world and everyone has to listen to me, right? So it's not humility in this totally self-annihilating way of, I'm nothing, what am I, who am I to know anything? Don't listen to me. Let me just, expire in silence because it's not worth acknowledging me. It's something different than that. And it presents us in its own right with a puzzle. Like, in what sense is Moshe or anav? In what sense is he humble? But I think we're starting to get at the way in which Moshe is humble, which is kind of what we've already been saying about him. He's humble in the sense that what his core talent is to know the word of Hashem, right? But all of the basis for his success is entirely the result of HaKadosh Baruch Hu making him succeed where he should not have, right? Everything that Moshe did, if he were a normal person, would not have succeeded because naturally speaking, what he's trying to do doesn't make sense. The word of Hashem does not spread itself naturally in the world and is not victorious naturally in the world. It is victorious miraculously. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to kind of set it up to be the case where you can see that it's his word because naturally it seems like it's not going to succeed. But then it does. And when it does, you see that it's because he puts his hand in and shows you his endorsement of it, right? So it's a complicated way of demonstrating the authenticity of revelation. And Moshe represents that mechanism, right? His staff that turns into a nachash is all about that, right? And so that is the sense in which Moshe is anav, that he's choosing to align himself so completely with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he's almost kind of setting himself up to have no talent of his own that he could be credited with producing success with, right? Unlike other people, the only thing that Moshe sets himself up to do is be this kind of conduit for the word of Hashem and to be a very good conduit of that. But that when the people are saved at Kriyat Yam Suf, it's not because Moshe is a very good sea splitter, or when the people are redeemed from Egypt, it's not because Moshe is very good at turning rivers to blood or making hail fall when he wants. It's that he puts himself so far in the background that the basis of all the success of what he's doing obviously comes directly from the hand of the creator of the world. And he's just a messenger. He's just a guy there to say what Hashem wants to sort of speak with his megaphone into the world. So you actually can establish more clearly the relationship to this idea of being Moshe Anav or Anav if you look for the appearance of that word elsewhere in the Torah, because Aleph, Nun, Vav does not appear that often in the Torah. It actually only appears in two places. One, where in the Torah we are shown that Moshe is the humblest person on earth, and then elsewhere, seemingly referring to a different word, we have this point where the people of Israel, 40 years after 40 years in the desert, after the episode with the fiery serpents, and Moshe makes a pole with a bronze serpent on it and everything for them, they start digging their own water. And it says, Az yashir Yisrael et hashira azod ari be'er einu lah be'er hafaruha sarim karuha nedivei ha'am b'mehokek b'mish'anutam u'mimidbar matana. Then Israel sang the song, Spring up, O well, sing you to it. The princes dug the well, the nobles of the people excavated with the scepter, with their poles, and from the wilderness they went to Matana. So, first of all, clearly this is connected with Shirat Hayam. It's Az Yashir Yisrael et Hashira Azot, instead of Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael. And you also again have the Et Hashira Azot appearing. So it's very similar language to that. And then there's this Ainula, which is, sing you to it. It's like from the root la'anot, perhaps to answer. But it sounds, the letters in the Torah would appear just as Aleph, Nun, Vav, so just like Anav. And what is it about? It's about the people digging their own water with their own poles, no less, right? So it's about, instead of having the staff of Moshe that strikes the rock and makes the water come out, that they are no longer depending on Moshe as much, and they can dig their own water. So there's this element of maturity that the people have achieved, where they've moved on. Moshe has done a good job kind of firing himself and giving them a chance to grow into the role that he has played for them. So that's another sense maybe where you could say Moshe is very humble, that he's always trying to teach people how to be, to do without him, as opposed to saying, like Paro, I am the center of everything and I'm always needed. But I think in particular, given what else we've been talking about, one also should emphasize back to this connection to Shirat Hayam. The Shirat Hayam is about Hashem, Ashir el Hashem ki ga'oga, right? I will sing about how triumphant and glorious Hashem is. So Moshe doesn't sing a song about his staff or about himself. He sings a song about Hashem, and the people are meant to understand that Moshe didn't do anything. Moshe is not mentioned in the song itself as some kind of great hero. Kadosh Baruch Hu is the hero of the story. And so the anvut, the humility of Moshe is that although he's present at these monumentally important moments, that he's this vessel or this conduit, this tool that HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses to reveal his Torah to Bnei Israel, and thereby send a message that really ultimately is about the future of all of humankind, and that he does these great wonders by using Moshe to sort of demarcate, this is when I'm going to do my wonder. It's when this guy is holding this stick and extending his hand and whatever it is. The point is that Moshe, at the end of the day, is pushed to the background, and this is about HaKadosh Baruch Hu putting his signature on things. And so that is the anvut of Moshe. And that is demonstrated especially in this parallelism of Az Yashir Yisrael at the Shira Hazot, where we have this reuse of the Ayin Nun Vav to demarcate a connection to Moshe's Anvut, where we're talking about a kind of replay of Shirat Hayam, where now the people are just digging the water for themselves. They don't ultimately need Moshe forever to give the miraculous water, because it was never he that was giving it to them anyway. It was actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So all of this being said, I think what we've done is we've more explicitly delineated what the position of Moshe is in Shirat Hayam. And we've said, okay, it represents his anvut, his unsurpassed humility, right? That Moshe doesn't do things with his own might and his own talent at the end of the day. Or at least you could say, if his talent is just speaking the true word of Hashem, that on the one hand is a very important talent, and on the other hand, it's a talent that cannot succeed in the world except because HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts others or other forces at play that cause unlikely events to occur that will make it more successful when he wants than it naturally would be. But that doesn't bring us all the way back to, okay, so then what is David HaMelech saying when he's saying, okay, I'm gonna use language talking about myself that puts me kind of in the position of being like Paro at some level. How do I explain that? And I think part of what maybe helps is also to think about in Shirat Hayam itself, part of what gets talked about is these nations that will tremble when they know that Hashem has done these miracles for Bnei Israel. And there's Canaan, and there's Edom, and there's Pilashet, which is the Plishtim, the Philistines, and then also Moab is the other one that's mentioned. And Moab is interesting because David comes from Moab. Not only that, Moshe is in Eretz Moab when he dies, right? So there's this connection between Moshe and Moab and David. And we have to remember, as we've argued in other shiurim, that Moab is the son of Lot, like the nation of Moab is descended from the son of Lot. And Lot was the nephew of Avram, who chose to go to Sdom, which was the kind of Egyptian wicked city inside the land of Israel that he went to because it was well watered. It looked to him like Egypt. It looked like a good economy. And the point is that David is descended from Lot through Moab, through Ruth HaMoaviyah, who converted and joined the tribe of Yehudah. And to the degree that that's the case, one might wonder, oh, well, does that mean David is just kind of slightly evil, slightly the bad guy in the way that Paro is the bad guy? But no, I think that the message is more balanced and more complex than that. It's not just saying Paro is always the bad guy. It's saying, look, if you're going to be a king in the land of Israel, a successful king who lays the ground for building the temple, then you can't be Moshe. Right? Moshe isn't allowed to enter the land. He dies in the land of Moab, which will ultimately produce David. Right? So there's this sense that David is coming, and somehow David springs from that moment where Moshe's line is cut off, because Moshe can't go into the land and be a king in the land, because there's something otherworldly and unreal about the existence that he represents. He's so much about the pure and perfect word of Hashem and the truth of what he has to say, representing Hashem, that everything about him has to be sustained by miraculous occurrence, directly from the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the only way the people can be fed. That's the only way the people can escape destruction. But that's not a way to actually build a kingdom in this world that can serve Hashem in this world with a temple in this world, etc. Right? If David is to be that person, then he has to have the qualities of Lot a little bit, right? There was ultimately a problem with Lot deciding it was worth it to go live with a bunch of wicked people just in order to have an economy. But on the other hand, you need to feed people in order for them to be virtuous, right? Ein kemach in Torah. If there's no flour, there's no Torah. as we learn from Chazal and Pirkei Avot. And so David he's from Beit Lechem, he's from the house of bread. He has to represent a little bit more this let's live in this world kind of attitude. And so, interestingly, that's saying about David also that maybe he's less humble than Moshe as a result. He's less anav, but he's flipping it around. He's saying, look, there was something good about the Anvut of Moshe, and I'm going to reference Shirat Hayam. And when I talk, I'm not going to push that under the rug. I'm going to draw your attention to Shirat Hayam and say, remember, all success comes from Hashem, and whenever Hashem wants to make complete wonders for you where you just sit back and watch, he can do that. But having acknowledged that, I'm not going to sit back, right? Because at some level, that extreme is problematic. Like if you say Hashem can't save you and you have to do it all yourself, that leads to idolatry and paro, right? But if you say, on the other hand, Hashem can save us, so why do we have to do anything? Let's just watch. Let's get our bucket of popcorn and let the miracles roll in. That's also a problem. That's a problem for a king who's going to lead a people, be'olam hazeh, in this world, in a real land, and defend it and conquer it and build in it. That way of relating to experience is a bit more forward-leaning, right? If you're going to be King David, then what you need is to be active and to go out and do things more like Avram, right? Hashem says to Avram, "Hidalech lifanai," go out before me. And David, in the same parak in Tehillim, he's talking so much about how active he is, right? He says, "Ki b'cha arutz gedud uve'elohai adaleg shur." For by you I can run through a troop, and by God I can leap over a wall. He's acknowledging that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of his strength, but he's going to leap over that wall, right? So it's him doing it. He's not saying, let Hashem make the walls fall down, like, for example, with Yehoshua is conquering Jericho. David will leap over the wall, but Hashem will be the reason he succeeds. So at the end of the day, what we see in David is an acknowledgement that there is value in being Moshe, and at some level we have to learn from that, and at some level that's the ultimate attitude, is that all success comes from Hashem, and so at some level if Hashem wants you to succeed, then it doesn't matter what you do, and if he wants you to fail, it doesn't matter what you do. But if you just say that to yourself all the time, that's paralyzing, right? Because then you just keep saying to yourself, okay, it doesn't matter what I do, so I won't do anything. I'll just let Hashem make it all happen. And interestingly, that phrase going back to before Shirat Hayam, Adonai ilachem lachem v'atem tahrishun. God will fight for you, and you can hold your peace. Tahrishun, interestingly, that verb appears in Megillat Esther, where Mordechai says to Esther, Ki im haresh tahrishi ba'et hazot, re'wach v'atzala ya'amon la'yehudim makom aher, va'at uvet avicha, va'at uvet avich, tovedu, u'miyudea im la'et kazot, higa'at lamalchut. For if you remain silent at this time, if you hold your peace at this time, then shall relief and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom, or the kingship, really, the queenship, for such a time as this. So the point is, Mordechai is acknowledging, on the one hand, yeah, sure, if Hashem wants things to turn out fine, he will. He'll make it turn out fine, and it doesn't need you. But you have a choice to make about whether you're going to be an active participant or whether you're going to sit back and watch. And if you sit back and watch, then he may make everything turn out for the Jews, but who knows, what will happen to you. And so this is a theme that, we see all throughout Tanakh. Theologically, we have to know it at some level. It's up to Hashem. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to take the fact that it's up to him and then be passive. Or at least he presents different models, and Moshe is the extreme, where it's such an extreme that no one is as humble as Moshe, right? you could either look at that as you can't be as humble as Moshe, or that it's saying don't try to be as humble as Moshe. In other words, no one else is going to succeed to the degree that Moshe did in just being a sort of pipeline for the word of Hashem that was made successful only by the hand of Hashem. Everyone else, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to study the Torah, understand from that what Hashem wants, and then try to do it. And then maybe sometimes he'll make you succeed, maybe sometimes he'll make you fail, and you iterate and you learn and you move along. But maybe you're not supposed to be David HaMelech either, right? There actually is a passage in the Gemara that compares verses from different kings of Judea, and David represents an extreme in that set of comparisons where he's saying, right? I will chase my enemy and catch up with them. David is talking like he doesn't rely on Hashem at all. He's going to try to do it himself. He's going to act as though Hashem is not there to help him, knowing that his success comes from Hashem, and knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will decide whether he's successful or fails. He's going to act like he lives in a world where it's all up to him. And yet he might attempt the impossible because he knows that's the only way he can serve Hashem, and then he'll have the confidence and the emunah not to do that because he knows it's all up to Hashem. Right? So that's maybe an extreme that's also hard for us to achieve, and other Malchei Yehuda don't quite reach that. Like they're represented as being, well, they sort of check whether Hashem is with them, and then they go, or there's some element of David is braver and more powerful than maybe we can expect of ourselves. But perhaps we are meant to be somewhere on the spectrum between Moshe and David. And that means both on the one hand, knowing that ultimately everything that happens is up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we can trust in him and rely on him. And also on the other hand, knowing that he expects us to act. He expects us to figure out what he wants us to do and to try to do it and to make a plan and execute the plan in an imagination of a world that we make where we conceive of the world as having rules and having nature and having manipulable components that we have to make sense of and we have to employ using our talents without relying on miracles and without relying on miraculous deliverance. So where that leaves us in terms of what we expect from our leaders, I think these days we may be more likely to be dealing with leaders at the opposite extreme to Moshe, right? That yes, it's true that we want leaders who will say Erodov Oivai Wasigim, but we also want leaders who have the anvut to understand that really all of their success is decided by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that they're not going to catch up with their enemy if they're not first asking themselves whether they're following HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So perhaps in another era, it might have been more common that you had people who would say, okay, my job as a leader is just to sit back and be faithful and be spiritual and read some more, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring about all the miraculous deliverance that we need. It's not clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give his backing to someone who's so passive and so lazily reliant on deliverance. But in the present era, in a world whose political discourse has no ability to speak of the judgment of Hashem and the need to do tshuva, the need to align ourselves with his agenda in order to succeed, maybe we should be hoping that Bezrat Hashem one day will have leaders who maybe, yes, will say Rodov Oivai Wasigim, but they will also say other things like what we just read, right? Ki bicha arutz gedud uve Elohai adaleg shuv, right? For by you I can run through a troop, and for my God, and by my God I can leap over a wall. That only because Hashem is with them will they succeed, and if they don't concern themselves with leading the nation in tshuva and leading the nation towards Hashem, then they shouldn't expect all of their techniques and stratagems to come to anything worthwhile.